Hello and welcome to Athlantic, the show where an American and a Brit take turns crossing the ponds to learn about sports culture in the UK and the USA. I'm Harry Collins, your resident Brit.
And I'm Adam Jordan, your resident American. I have 7 years of professional experience working in sports, both at the college and pro levels.
And I just got my master's in sports management and the business of football. I've been studying sports far longer than that, and that's actually where Adam, you and I met at UNC Chapel Hill, where we bonded over a shared passion for each other's sports culture.
We met on the soccer pitch, not really, but that's where the friendship really blossomed. And I think both of us had some pretty big dreams, and I think they're starting to work out. So
And
that's
wildly varying levels of talent for soccer.
yeah, we didn't need to go into that, but I did have that one incredible free kick that literally turned the lights out at the fields. But
When I
that's a
close my eyes, I still see it sailing into that top corner.
But that's a story
Um,
for another time. Probably never, because it's not that good of a story. But that's a story for another time. I really want to learn today, Harry, from you about the FA Cup. I've heard so many things about this mystical tournament, and it's starting soon. I think I'm not sure, but I want to learn more either way.
well, good news is I know it, and soon you'll know it. Um, Adam, I'm going to start with a quick trivia question. And you can probably guess the answer because it's the theme of today's show. But what does the London Borough of Tooting, the Metropolitan Police, and British Airways have in common?
It's got to be something to do with soccer.
They were they were all knocked out of the FA Cup last month.
What?
It's
What?
incredible. So why does British Airways, why does the Metropolitan Police, and why does a tiny little silly place in London called Tooting all have a football team that we give half a care about in this episode? Well, that's because we are talking about the FA Cup, which is the longest running sports football competition in the UK. And the FA Cup has this incredible place in football fans' hearts in the UK because it really represents the full breadth and the full beauty of the football pyramid, which I'm sure everyone has heard a little bit about, but we get to discuss a little bit more today.
Watch Welcome to Wrexham if you haven't.
Yes, yeah, perfect illustration. Yeah, promotion and relegation is a beautiful thing. Americans should pick it up. We all understand that. The one thing that Americans don't need to pick up is a fast firing, intense, romantic knockout tournament. You've got them in spades. All of your leagues seem to finish with them. You've got the playoffs. But the FA Cup to me is the really special knockout tournament. It's one of two that we have in English football, but it's easily the longest, and it has this fantastic, unique um, romantic element wherein, and I'm gonna cut straight to the chase. Professional and non-professional football teams are able to compete together. What better initial illustration for the American dream than the English FA Cup, where anyone can be the hero, anyone can win. Um, we're gonna talk throughout this season about a bunch of English and American competitions, and I look forward to hearing um, other structures and other leagues and competitions in America that match this. This is where I'm throwing my flag in the ground, and I'm saying this is the gold standard for professional sports. But like, where does it begin? I'm gonna tell you.
That I have
Um,
to say that is a bold claim. I am excited to hear
I'm
you defend
I'm
this.
more. I will die on that hill.
Incredible. All
Um,
right, let's hear it.
so in the history of the FA Cup is history of football, is the history of soccer, really. And it starts in the 1860s, where football teams that we recognize as football today start to pop up in two very separate spheres. You have the sort of posh boys academic football in London and the southeast, and you also have industrial football where The workforce in factories have come up with what are called factory teams, many of which survive today. The most famous of which is probably Manchester United. And these two spheres of football start developing in complete isolation from each other, and they only start really crossing paths in friendly games where someone takes a day long train ride to go and play the other team. There's really no infrastructure for it until in the autumn or fall of the 1871 season. 50 teams were invited to take part in the inaugural FA Cup that unites these two spheres, and they're class spheres, they're socioeconomic spheres, but they're literally physical areas. They're geographical areas in the UK that are completely not disconnected, but they're completely separate in sport. And
Which I need
in
to interrupt real quick just to point out that the separate geographical spheres you're talking about is about the difference in distance from like Washington DC to Boston, maybe.
unfortunately, you're completely correct. In fact, it's considerably shorter than that. Um, but these spheres become united in this invitation to play in a trophy competition. Only 12 teams initially started, and in those 12 teams, we had mostly teams in London, which were that academic sphere I was talking about, and then teams in Buckinghamshire, as far away as Glasgow, and a lot in the northwest of England, where Manchester, Liverpool, Greater Manchester's got a bunch of small industrial towns in. They were all introduced into this one competition. Now, the first, unfortunately, I say the first FA Cup was won by a team called Wanderers out of a small part of London called Leytonstone. They actually won the first two, and then the third one was won by Oxford University. Bizarre. And it doesn't help illustrate my point that this was really uniting the country. In the first 30 FA Cups, the South, really London and the surrounding counties, won 11. 11 of these, all 11 of the first FA Cups, and the consensus was it was another way of like the London elite, the wealthy elite, sort of marring and dirtying the sport of the working class. But after the 11th FA Cup, the industrial towns of the north, Wigan and Bury and Bolton and Sheffield, absolutely stormed through. And suddenly, football, this history of football, the FA Cup, the history of football, was ripped out of London and was put in really football's, soccer's heart, and its heartland is in the northwest and the northeast of England.
Folks,
Um,
that's what I call the power of organized labor.
now, oh god, yeah, you're right. Football wouldn't exist without unions. There, we said it. Oh my god, we've taken our first political stance. Um, in the 19th competition, that was the first one won by a London team after those initial 11, and that was actually Tottenham Hotspur, who are the first London team that still exist. All of the initial London teams that won the first collection of FA Cups have all disappeared. They've all been either absorbed or they dissolved, and they've all moved on. Um, Now, in the first 100 FA Cups, we still see the North sort of dominate, um, which is really cool. 16 different towns, many of which, because this is far more common in the UK, many of these towns have multiple teams have won the FA Cup. So the FA Cup really does belong to industrial industrial towns and cities in the UK. And later on in a podcast in many months from now, I'm going to tell you why provincial towns and port towns specifically do better in soccer. But we will reach that point later on.
Okay.
um so far, am I winning you over, Adam?
You're y- I am loving the kind of I'm loving it so far. I've got some
Good,
thoughts, but and I
mm,
have a lot of questions,
good,
but I am you're slowly getting me there.
excellent. Now
I have to
the
say, with some of the town names alone,
yeah, yeah,
you know,
tooting. That's funny. Now, with the sort of pride that I discuss, these this northern domination. A lot of my friends make fun of me for being northern. I'm from the south of England. I just think that it's really fantastic that, as we will talk about in a couple of minutes, the FA Cup has belonged to the North because it does start to the center of gravity for football has in the last 2 decades specifically really pulled south. But that's another story for another time. Um, so that's sort of where we've come from. It doesn't really explain, other than the patriotism. It doesn't really explain why we love the FA Cup now. And I'm going to say there are probably three massive reasons. Number one, I already said it, semi-professional and completely amateur teams get to have the opportunity to play professional teams. And I cannot think of another instance where that happens in American sports. But it's like if the Durham Bulls, what, triple A baseball
yeah,
team,
yeah.
got to, by winning a couple of games, got the opportunity to play the New York Yankees. Like the potential for these people have day jobs. The Metropolitan Police are literally the police force in London. They get to go and play your Zlatan Ibrahimovic's and your Wayne Rooney's and your David Beckham's. And this happens every year, Adam. It would be like if the Durham Bulls got to, by succeeding, got to play the New York Yankees. Can you imagine? Um, literal policemen. If they win enough, they get to play against Erling Haaland and the best players in the Premier League. Does America have anything like that, Adam?
I mean, no, I mean, I guess the March Madness, the NCAA tournament's the closest thing, but at that point, it would be like if North Carolina were playing the UNC intramural, the NC State intramural basketball team. Like
Sure.
there's no comparison. You're not pulling people off
See,
the street.
I must be winning you over. I can
I,
feel you falling in love with it.
you're getting there.
Reason number two, and this is a little bit more of a scholarly reason why we love football, why
Okay.
we love the FA Cup. The FA Cup is currently the most effective way of funding um, amateur and semi-professional football across the UK. The prize money for even winning like the very preliminary rounds, which are going on at the moment, are between a couple of thousand and £10,000. That's if you win. You get a third of that even if you lose. So just for being there, you get enough money to keep investing into your team. It's not enough to keep the team running for the whole year, but if an amateur team wins 6 games in a row, suddenly they've earned more money than they've ever had in their entire club history. It's
Wow.
terrific. And then number three, there's the opportunity to see. It's another reason. There's another opportunity to see your team win a piece of silverware, which again I'm not sure happens much in American sport. If you're an NFL fan, the only thing you can hope to see your team win and lift at the end of the season is the Super Bowl. But in football, we have, at the end of the season, there will be a winner of the Premier League and there's a winner of the FA Cup. And they're going to be different teams. The number of times that the same team wins both is really infrequent. So it gives, I support a team that aren't always battling at the top of the Premier League. And in the last 5 years, I've been able to go and watch my team at the best stadium in England, at Wembley Stadium, uh, to fight for an opportunity to win the FA Cup. And that's giving the hope to every single football fan in the country. Starts the season with an opportunity to win something. That's incredible. Um,
Yeah. If you're you know, Queens Park Rangers, you're never gonna have hope of lifting the Premier League trophy, to my understanding.
un-
But you do have a chance to win another competition.
Yeah, if you want to win the Premier League, you've got to be in the Premier League, and then you've got to win a vast majority of the 38 games once you're in the league. If you want to win the FA Cup and your QPR, you've got to win 6 games.
That's
And now
doable.
some of those games are going to be against really, really good teams, but hey, they might have a bad day. And if they have a bad day, you have the best day of your life. And that's why the FA Cup's so good. And I love it. And it just started, and it really kicks off for Premier League teams that only get added in the third round, which is in January. So we'll revisit it then, and I'll tell
Okay.
you how much I love it all over again.
Yeah, we'll have to get a live update. But okay, so the first thing that comes to mind here, because I have a number of questions. The first thing that comes to mind though is kind of what we were just talking about. Americans love a good Cinderella story. We love watching St. Peter's, the 15 seed a few years ago in the
Yes.
men's March Madness tournament, make it
Yes.
to the Elite Eight and then lose to Carolina
Yes.
and then have Carolina win against Duke in the Final Four. But anyway, we
Yeah, we're not
love
sad
those
about that.
stories. Yeah, it don't matter. We love those stories. Does that ever happen? Does a Cinderella team ever go all the way?
So, even though I just said all of that, I've got only 5 real instances of where a really good Cinderella story comes in. And
Okay.
one of them, sorry, Tottenham fans, doesn't count. So the first one, I mentioned it earlier. In 1901, in the 19th FA Cup, Tottenham Hotspur became the only team in history to be a non-football league team, like Wrexham were at the beginning of AFC Wrexham documentary. This is Wrexham, that's what it's called. Um, Spurs became the only team in FA Cup history to win the FA Cup without being in the Football League. But there's a massive asterisk, and Spurs fans will know that there's a massive asterisk because Spurs had an incredible team and had literally refused to enter the Football League. They've been invited and they said no. So, no, you don't get that one, Spurs fans. That's another thing that you can cry on this season. Number 2, in 2013, Oldham Athletic are a League One team. They beat Liverpool, massive team at home. So, imagine going down to, and Oldham Athletic Stadium is not very big. We're talking like 9,000 people. Um, you come and see some of the world's best footballers in your own back garden, and you beat them. Yes, best night of your life. In 2015, a historically um, deprived area, a city in the UK called Bradford that used to be a huge industrial city, and now it's been one of those cities that's being left behind, walked into Stamford Bridge in the poshest part of London, the most expensive part of the UK, and spanked Chelsea 4-2. They made it to the FA Cup semi-final. So they went to Chelsea and then they went to Wembley. Incredible. And then the 2 really good Cinderella stories. Number 1, in 2013, a team called Wigan Athletic were relegated from the Premier League and 2 weeks later beat Manchester City, who were the reigning Premier League champions. One of the best teams in Premier League history were beaten by a team that had just proven they were one of the worst teams in Premier League history. And yeah, magic of the cup. It was a 93-minute winner. I still remember the header in my head. Incredible.
So
Um,
I'm what I'm hearing is that it hasn't happened much, but it's happened a good bit recently. Like we're in a good
so
stretch.
yes, we're in a good period. Um, that's one of the few really good things that we have to be optimistic about the FA Cup with, because unfortunately there are some issues that we're starting to develop a little bit more.
Okay.
Um,
I want to
in
hear more
fact,
about those because I think you were you I was asking before, are there any like before we started recording, are there any like changes that are like proposed changes to the format? Because it sounds like it's been kind of like, and you were kind of hinting at this. So
yeah, unfortunately, the Premier League, the Premier League, and the Champions League, and the European structure of football is pushing the FA Cup into a little bit of obscurity. One of the mechanisms in the FA Cup that is so wonderful is if a team draw, if a game is drawn, uh, they don't settle it with penalties or they don't go to added time. they simply replay the game in the other stadium. Now, it is tradition that the bigger football team, especially if it's a Premier League team versus a League One or a League Two, a third or fourth tier team, it is tradition that the big team give all of the gate receipts to the small team. That's sort of like the spirit of the cup, like I said
Yeah,
earlier. Now, having a replay means that that's twice as likely. If you manage to draw your game against Liverpool and then you go to Anfield, Anfield holds 65,000 seats. It's way more than Oldham Athletics 9,000 seats. So it's a huge injection of revenue to the club, even if they lose. And
sure.
also, it's a great opportunity to go and see your team play in a stadium that you wouldn't normally see them play in, which is wonderful. That was just scrapped. um, FA Cup replays have been scrapped, and now they are
What?
decided on the day with extra time and penalties. And unfortunately, that's because it's been deemed that in English football, the elite teams are playing too much football. And
Interesting.
that's a catch 22, because if you're good enough to play elite football, you're earning enough money to employ more players, so they don't all have to play the 70 games that you're worried about. So yeah, there are changes to the format that are unfortunately probably going to choke those Cinderella stories and take away a key reason that we love the FA Cup.
Well, that's very unfortunate. I have a feeling we'll revisit this at some point, but I hope that there's still, even if there aren't replays, I hope that we still get some, some of those Cinderella stories and,
Oh god, yeah.
coming up, because that just seems like a lot of fun. So I will definitely have to watch. You have won me over. I have
I'll
to
um
say you've
I'll
done the job.
I'll I'll keep you updated with any later in the season. If we're having any good Cinderella stories, I'll make sure that we know them.
Please do, because I don't know how much of it, those earlier rounds, we can watch here. I've definitely seen it on, in the later rounds, but I don't know how
Sure.
much we can watch early on. Um, so the other question that I have is, all of this that we've been talking about, this entire, conversation, 20 plus minutes, has been about the men's game.
Sure.
Is that I Obviously, women's sports is a critical part of the sporting landscape, and unfortunately, it's taken a long time for it to get the recognition that it deserves, and at least over here, and I think even more so probably over there. And I still think that there's a long way to go, but is there a parallel structure on the women's side, and is that, does that have the same level or a growing level of popularity?
So, great point. One of the key themes in this podcast is going to be America does women's sports so much better than England does. And we are playing catch up. And I think more and more we're playing catch up harder and harder, but it's not good enough. Yes, to answer your question, the FA Cup exists. There is a women's competition. It's structured the exact same. Amateur teams are added in September. The first round was very recently, and those are literally the women's teams that play in the park down the road. And this will trickle through until May, when we have the final. So, how can we track how big the women's FA Cup is? Firstly, I'm not going to do this well enough. We will do a separate podcast on the state of women's football in the US and the UK, because it's a really important conversation,
Yep.
especially around like FA Cup, World Cup, and Euros years. Um, in 2015, I would say it's the first time that the FA Cup final was being, or the FA Cup in general for the women's game, was taken really seriously. And that was indicated by, it was the first year in 2015 when the women's final was played at Wembley.
Oh, wow.
Wembley, if anyone doesn't know, is empty. There is no team that play in Wembley every year. It stands only to host the biggest matches in football. Um, and for the other 350 days of the year, nothing happens. So to not give Wembley to the women's final is an acknowledgement that the FA did not take women's football seriously until 2015. In that game, um, about 32,000 people attended. And that was the first real indicator that yes, women's football is too big to have a final just in a club stadium like it was before. Fast forward to last year, or rather May this year, last season, Manchester United played Spurs women's team in front of 76,000 people. And suddenly we're talking about, yes, we're starting to fill Wembley. Now, that's not completely full. And also, this is a couple of years after the women's team, the Lionesses, won the Euros. So we're
Right.
still cresting that wave of popularity. But it's indicative that we're getting there. Unfortunately, the winners of the men's FA Cup, that team take £2 million. And they're typically split between the players and the coaches and the backroom staff, and often, the cafeteria and the training ground staff. The women's winners in 2024 won £430,000. So it's just over a fifth of the amount. And unfortunately, there's no point, if we're trying to grow the women's game, there's no point keeping earnings low until the viewership comes up. You have to do it the other way around.
Yeah.
That's my opinion. I'm not an economist, but we did study this for a while. We've got to present the product that people will want to pay for by investing properly. And that
Yeah.
is using Wembley. That is giving them the £2 million that they rightfully deserve, especially when the Lionesses have been far more successful than the men's national team. So the answer is yes, it's moving in the right direction, but unfortunately, I think it's not moving nearly quickly enough. So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
we're
yeah.
getting there, but I wish it was faster.
It's good to see that there's growth, and I hope that will continue, and we'll have to you'll have to update me. Hopefully I can, find the women's FA Cup here as well, but you'll
Yeah.
have to update me as well. Well, all right.
Well,
Well, I think that's gonna wrap. I think it's gonna wrap the FA Cup
that's
part,
it.
unless you had anything
That's
else,
all I've.
Harry.
No, that's all I've got. If you're not an FA Cup convert by now, we'll do this again next week and the
Yeah,
week after
we'll just
and the
keep
week
doing
after.
it.
I will get you.
The FA Cup pods will continue until morale improves. All right, well, that's all the time that we have. I've greatly enjoyed learning about the FA Cup, and like you said, Harry, if you're not a convert, then we're just going to keep talking about it until you
Yeah,
are.
I'll.
But I
I will
learned a
try
lot.
harder.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then you didn't do a very good job. I learned a lot. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll have more of these. We'll have more of these coming out. All on this YouTube page. We won't be. That's our platform for right now. So we'll see where we
This is
go
it.
from there.
This is home,
This is home. This is home.
and this is my home,
This is
and it's
your
your
home.
home.
This is my home. Crazy technology. Bye,
Oh,
Harry.
good evening, Adam.
Good evening. Is that a
We can try that again if you want.